Hello, my name is Jeremy Sims, and I enjoy studying the Bible and sharing my observations with other people. So if you like hearing people talk about the Bible, this is the show for you. Congratulations. I'm sure I'm the only person on YouTube doing anything like this, so I basically have you locked in. You can't go anywhere else for this sort of content. No, I hope it'll be something interesting to you. I just like studying the Bible and trying to think about things from different perspectives and figure out as much as I can. So if that's interesting to you, cool. You're in the right place. Jeremiah is a book people don't talk about very much, so it's a good chance that there's stuff in here you have not seen before, unless you've spent a lot of time studying Jeremiah. We're going to do a little section. I think we're going to stick to Jeremiah 5, 14 through 19. I keep on finding that I try to do slightly bigger sections, about a half a chapter, and then it ends up going on between well over an hour. So I'm going to try to do a little bit more of a bite-sized piece here. Some things we're going to talk about today is just some stuff that teaches us the fear of the Lord, that kind of affirms that. I also think there's some stuff in here that really shows us that I think it speaks a little bit about human nature and the fact that we kind of have to serve and worship something. At least that's something I kind of see in here. Also have some ideas of some things that I think that perhaps God is alluding to here that I couldn't find anybody else suggesting. So the fact that only I am seeing it probably means I'm wrong. But I thought I'd share those anyway. Kind of have to do with some of the things God mentions here and what I think he might be referencing. So we'll get into that, and I guess that's about it. I think we can run into it at this point and see what we come up with. So before we get into today's text, let's do a quick recap of the last section we did, which is basically that first half of Jeremiah chapter 5. So hopefully you'll recall that God said, he told Jeremiah, go and search Jerusalem, see if you can find a single righteous man, one who I think seeks justice and truth, if I'm recalling correctly. It's actually been about a month and a half break since the last time I taught one of these. Just got caught up in some other stuff, so forgive me if my memory's a little rusty there. But something along those lines. One who seeks justice and truth, I think. But anyway, a single righteous man, essentially. And the implication pretty clear. They have all refused to take correction. They have all refused to follow after God and repent. An entire city, it seems to be saying, unless that's hyperbole, all of Jerusalem couldn't find a single righteous person. It said both the poor and great alike had gone astray. Jeremiah actually mentions, I went to the poor first and they didn't know God, but I thought, oh, I can find somebody better. The great people will know God. And it said, no, not really. They're just as horrible. So God starts saying, well, then predators are coming your way. He uses the example of actual literal predators, like I believe there's a leopard and wolves and things, lions. Kind of says those are coming and they're going to gobble you up, essentially. And God starts asking them a question and says, how am I even supposed to forgive you guys? Like the things that you're doing, he mentions there, spiritual adultery, which has been mentioned many times throughout Jeremiah. It's a common metaphor that God uses and Jeremiah uses. But he also mentions their actual physical sexual sins as well, that they're just committing adultery all the times, that they were trooping to the houses of whores, I believe is how it was described. And then it goes on, and God uses this, says something about like taking out harvesting the vine rows, and I'm not completely sure if that is suggesting the idea that the enemy Babylon is gonna come through Judah and just take everything away, or if that's actually the opposite, where God is saying, hey, you, Jeremiah, go and glean as much as you can from the branches, save who you can before the judgment comes. Or it might be some mixture of both. I wasn't sure exactly how to take that. It seemed to me both readings would work. And I kind of got the impression that's like, get as much as you can before the judgment comes. But he says, go through the vine rows, but he says there's a response, Jeremiah and God are kind of speaking, prophetically and, reading the mood of the people. And the people of Judah responded to all Jeremiah's warnings by saying, he will do nothing, meaning God will do nothing. No disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. The prophets will become wind, and by that they're saying the prophets of God, like Jeremiah, the true prophets of God, they're going to become wind, empty, nothing to them. The word is not in them. Thus shall it be done to them. So all the bad things that the prophets are prophesying, that Jeremiah's prophesying will happen to Judah, they're saying, not only is that not true, that's actually going to happen to you. You're the bad guy. It's really interesting. And something on that same note, as a spiritual leaders, I've done at this point some more research because it's been a month and a half. I've done some more research into the nature of Jeremiah's situation on more practical ground level of what was going on in Judah at the time. And some things to note is that he went to the religious leaders and he was rejected by them. All the wickedness we hear of happening in the land, it was the religious people that were promoting this. The people who were supposed to be protecting and guiding the flock were actually sending them off to destruction in many ways. And something else that this doesn't directly tie, other than it's something important that I missed at the time, the Jeremiah spending all this time decrying the priestly leadership, but he was himself the son of a priest. So I know there was great hostility, and eventually his family wanted to kill him. I don't know if that includes his father. I'm not sure if that's recorded in the Bible. If so, I haven't studied enough detail. But his own family, his own priestly family, wanted to kill him. And that might have even been the high priest of Judah, because the high priest of Judah mentioned in the story of Josiah, and the high priest of Jeremiah, and the name of the high priest under the reign of Josiah, I mentioned in, I think, Kings, and the name of Jeremiah's father were the same. They were both named Hilkiah. So it was very possible that that Jeremiah was crying out about the wickedness of his own father, his own family. So that it kind of recontextualizes everything he's saying. As bad as it already was from the stuff I knew, realizing that makes it even worse. How uncomfortable that must have been. So anyway, but yeah, going back to the text here, they say of Jeremiah's prophecies, he said, God will do nothing, no disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. The prophets will become wind. The word is not in them, thus shall it be done to them. So they're not telling the truth, according to the people of Judah, which are, of course, wrong. So let's go ahead and read, we'll read the whole section, verses 14 through 19. Therefore thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, because you have spoken this word, behold, I am making my words in your mouth a fire, and this people wood, and the fire shall consume them. Behold, I am bringing against you a nation from afar, O house of Israel, declares the Lord. It is an enduring nation, it is an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. Their quiver is like an empty tomb. They are all mighty warriors. They shall eat up your harvest and your food. They shall eat up your sons and your daughters. They shall eat up your flocks and your herds. They shall eat up your vines and your fig trees, your fortified cities in which you trust. They shall beat down with the sword. But even in those days, declares the Lord, I will not make a full end of you. And when your people say, why has the Lord our God done all these things to us? You shall say to them, as you have forsaken me and served foreign gods in your land, so you shall serve foreigners in a land that is not yours. So let's back up to verse 14, and we'll just start breaking it down verse by verse. Therefore thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, because you have spoken this word, behold, I am making my words in your mouth a fire, and this people wood, and the fire shall consume them. So it's interesting how God introduces himself here. He says, therefore thus says the Lord, the God of hosts. God of hosts is referring to like the military host, it would seem. So this is God coming in his military role, you could say. Kind of a pretty clear indication that he's angry, and you don't want that. You don't want God to come in his person of as being God of hosts at you anyway. Maybe to your side, maybe behind you, maybe leading the charge, but you don't want him coming at you. And that seems to be the impression we get here. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, behold, you have spoken this word. What word? Well, it was what I kept on reading there a second ago, where they were saying, he will do nothing, no disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. The prophets will become wind. This word is not in them, thus shall it be done to them. That's what the foolish people of Judah are saying, and God saying, because you have spoken this word, because you're talking this way, behold, I am making my words in your mouth a fire. The words of Jeremiah were going to become like a fire. So they said that the words of the prophets were going to be like wind, and God says, nope, it's going to be like fire. and this people, the people of Judah, would, and the fire shall consume them. So a pretty clever turn of phrase. I'm actually reading or I've read a little bit of a book called Terror on Every Side. It's a series of books. It's seems to be okay. It's not fantastic, but it's a novelization of the life of Jeremiah. And something interesting they did there is they take a lot of the times the things that Jeremiah is saying in his prophecies are direct responses to people, things that people had actually said to him. So you can imagine perhaps one time Jeremiah is out there and teaching, and people literally say, "He will do nothing, no disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine," and then he gets a word from God, and he actually responds to a literal question that was put to him. I thought of these before, and they very well may be Jeremiah kind of knowing how the people think and speaking for them in that way, but it hadn't occurred to me before that he might be literally just responding to what they were saying, maybe thinking about it, maybe praying about it, getting a word from God later. But it would make perfect sense, because after all, Jeremiah would be out there probably repeating the same sorts of prophecies over and over and over again. So anyway, yeah, so they say he's full of wind, and God responds by saying, no, he's going to be fire to you. And of course, we have this association with judgment through fire, that we see that echoed all throughout the Bible. One thing to kind of think about with this is there is, I think, in American Christianity anyway, this sort of unspoken rule. We've added like a 11th commandment, and the 11th commandment is you should be nice to people. And it occurs to me that God's not being particularly nice, nor is Jeremiah here. It's something that I'm finding with my daughter. She's young, and I made the mistake of, when I was trying to get her to act right, I told her she's not acting nice. And now sometimes when I'm using a harsh tone with her to try to get her to mind or get her attention, she'll say, "That's not nice." Or even if I'm just not giving her what she wants, she goes, "That's not nice." And I realized it was a mistake to use the term nice, because, quite frankly, I don't necessarily want her to be nice. If there are many cases in which I might not want her to be nice, there might be people to which she does not need to be nice to in her life. It's not about being nice, it's about being good. And those two things are not the same. Nice is kind of soft and compliant and always, trying to make other people feel comfortable. Seems to be kind of how I would describe niceness. And those are some fine qualities to have that definitely have their role, but they are not inherently good. You can be nice and still be doing evil stuff. And in this case, Jeremiah was not called to be nice. He was called to have some harsh judgment. So we need to reprogram ourselves from what I think our churches have largely taught us, this kind of a little bit of an namby-pamby passiveness, and society to a certain degree as well. But I actually think this is probably a flaw of the churches. I think they have mistaken being good with being nice. Certainly, you don't see. I don't see a huge amount of concern with being nice in many parts of the non-Christian world. So I don't know if this is a cultural value, but it seems to be sort of a quasi-Christian value that we've picked up. And we need to be aware of that and realize that there's a time to be harsh. So, anyway, let's move on. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, because you have spoken this word, behold, I am making my words in your mouth a fire, and this people wood, and the fire shall consume them. Behold, I am bringing against you a nation from afar, O house of Israel. We know, of course, in retrospect, this is referring to Babylon coming for the land of Judah. Declares the Lord. It is an enduring nation. It is an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. So it is an enduring nation. This nation had been going back a long time. In fact, I guess it depends exactly how you want to think of as a nation. Usually at that time they were more like a people group rather than from my understanding. Everything I say should be taken with a healthy grain of salt. I spend hours looking into a passage and considering it, but there's so much depth that I'm barely scratching the surface. So everything I say take with a grain of salt. But at the time it was more like a people group would be thought of as a nation as opposed to these particular borders in this particular area. It wasn't quite structured as we think of nations these days a lot of times. But yeah, this people group had been around a long time. In fact, the Babylonian Empire, which was coming to destroy them, was part of the Chaldean people. And the Chaldean people were the same people that Abraham left. Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldees. And same thing as the Chaldean people that founded Babylon eventually. So this had been people that have been around a very long time. Is an ancient nation. It was an enduring nation. Babylon had a little bit of empire of itself, or at least was, a significant city. And they got beaten by the Assyrian military and became a tributary state of the Assyrian Empire. And then they would, at this point, they would at some point overthrow the Assyrian Empire, and the Babylonian Empire would scoop up all their power, almost all the Assyrian Empire's territory. So they were dominant. They were a significant military force, an enduring nation, and it is an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. This is really important to think about how big a deal this was. Now, they would have actually been kind of a somewhat related language, but it would have been such a different dialect that it would have been basically impossible for the Judean people to understand what they meant. And it's really worth considering how important the language is. It's a bit old now, though when I was first looking at this, the shootings, I think it was in an Asian spa, there was a shooting that took place there a couple months ago. And it made me think about that, because as I understand it, a lot of times the spa in this case was a place where they did sexual favors and massages, and this is not a terribly uncommon thing, where Asian spas are often used as human trafficking areas. And as it's been explained to me, the issue is that people will come over here, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally, but they bring people who do not know English, and they keep them close tabs on them. They make them work in the salon. They keep them from ever having much chance to learn English. So what happens by this is that they have very little opportunity to get any help. They don't know anything about the larger American culture. They wouldn't know where to go to for help if they needed it. They wouldn't be able to talk to people. They're kept very isolated in a bubble, without any real ability to get the help they would need to get out of human trafficking for sexual purposes. And obviously it's all horrible stuff, but you think about that, just how limiting it is if you can't speak the language of the people, the dominant culture. How do you deal with that? It's a horrible imposition. It really limits people's ability to succeed, or even get help if they are in danger. So these are very serious threats. I mentioned that I had some takes on this that I hadn't heard anybody else suggest. Two of them both relate to this verse. One of them is the idea that, it mentions this whole idea of it's an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. Well, this reminds me of the story of the Tower of Babel, where, of course, people were, well, it's complicated what exactly they were doing there, but regardless, Tower of Babel, God didn't like it. I know this is a short version of it, but so God scattered them and made it where they could not speak the same language. They all had their different languages. So it seems to me maybe this is purposely echoing the idea of that sort of confusion, that judgment that, people were rebelling against God, and he sent them that judgment where they didn't speak each other's language. And I say you're going to have sort of a similar judgment to that. We're going to be in a land where you don't know what people say, how people speak. So it seems like maybe that was a similar concept. Maybe not. Maybe it's just two similar judgments, but it does break the pace here of it's an enduring nation, it's an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. It spends some more time about that, so it kind of highlights it for some reason, as opposed to the enduring and ancient nation parts. So it seems to me there's something of significance there. So maybe it's a reference to the Tower of Babel. The other thing that came to mind for me was again, the Chaldeans thing. I wouldn't make too much of this, but Abraham came out of the land of the Chaldeans. His ancestors were pagan. He was living in a pagan place, and he was called away from that to be a follower of the true God. And now his descendants had refused the true God. They were no longer following him, and here they are being returned back to the same people, the same nation as from which they originally came. So, God kind of brought Abraham out of paganism, and now his descendants had turned against God, and now God's kind of sending them back into the pagan world. Again, this is an idea nobody else mentioned, so I'm not sure how much to make of it. Some similar ideas is what's the actual geography here, from which I just did a teeny tiny amount of looking into, and I don't know if I can even remember the specifics. I've heard people say that the Tower of Babel was on the actual site of what became Babylon, but obviously see very similar names there, but I couldn't find that was actually true. It seems to be that nobody really knows where the Tower of Babel is, from what I could tell. At least there's not a big consensus about it. I did find some people suggesting that the Tower of Babel was at Babylon, but that doesn't seem to be even one of the leading theories, so probably nothing there. In terms of where exactly, I don't think Abraham left the exact area of Babylon, but he was again from that people. It would have been if you want to talk about a very large area, the Chaldean area of control, it was, in the same area of Chaldean control. So anyway, I think those are interesting ideas, things that I just thought were worth considering. Maybe it's a reference to Tower of Babel. Maybe there's some idea of, Abraham came out of the Chaldeans, and now his descendants are going back to that pagan world. So if it feels like we're dragging a little bit, we're about to pick up the pace here. It is an enduring nation, is an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. Their quiver is like an open tomb. They are all mighty warriors. Again, mighty warriors. They overthrew the biggest empire in the area at the time. They didn't do it alone. There was another power that also fought against Assyria. Can't remember who. Maybe the Medes. But anyway, two rival empires kind of went after Babylon, overthrew them as the big power in the area, and then Babylon scooped them up. So they were mighty warriors. I think this phrase, their quiver is like an empty tomb, is kind of interesting. What first came to mind for me on that was the idea that, empty tomb, your quiver is, the thing that holds the arrows, and it's kind of shaped like a box, a rectangle. And if you had a whole tomb full of those, which is maybe in a similar shape, kind of, right? Because, it's people-sized, then that would be a very big amount of arrows you'd be able to fit in that. So my thought originally on it was of that being speaking to like just massive resources of like almost like a tomb-sized quiver. However, the take that most people have on it, which is probably a better take, is just that it's saying like every quiver they have is a dead Judean. Every one is an empty tomb. It's almost like if we're going off to war, and they said like every magazine the soldier carries is a dead enemy of the United States, which I think is probably the correct take there. Sort of a clever turn of phrase there. Their quiver is like an empty tomb. Verse 17, they shall eat up your harvest and your food. They shall eat up your sons and your daughters. They shall eat up your flocks and your herds. They shall eat up your vines and your fig trees. Your fortified cities in which you trust, they shall beat down with the sword. I would kind of see a good rhythm here when you're preaching or teaching. It's nice. not that I succeed in this area very often, but it's nice if you can have a good rhythm. That's an impressive technique, and we see that here. Jeremiah, at least in his poetry, as he had it written down, he has that nice rhythm. He has that nice repetition. They shall eat up your harvest and your food. They shall eat up your sons and your daughters. Just has a nice flow to it. We see your harvest, your food, your flocks, your herds, your vines, your fig trees, all these food items. And there in the midst of that, there's your sons and your daughters, which is, kind of scary. I don't think it means actually literally eating them up, but maybe it's thrown in there as casually as if they have so little regard for your sons and daughters as they would have for consuming your food. They give it no thought. Your fortified cities in which you trust they shall beat down with the sword. A little bit of a dig there. I mean, I guess it's all a dig, but especially with the fortified cities, like this is where you put your trust. You didn't put your trust in God, but you put your trust in your cities, and those are going to be destroyed. Beat down with the sword is kind of a weird phrase. I've checked some different translations, and some of them translate it that way. Some just say destroyed. I don't know if it could be that maybe it's more literally beat down with the sword, and some translations go with the destroyed. You know, a little bit of an idiom there. Anything else on verse 17? I know fig trees are used in the Bible quite a bit, and I've heard people say that there's some real significance to when fig trees are mentioned, but I don't know what that is, so I will not share any of that with you, but something that I would have looked into if I had some more time. But I do know enough to know that fig trees come up repeatedly, and that's probably not an accident. But even in those days, declares the Lord, I will not make a full end of you. So we see here God still honoring his promise. This was way back in the original Mosaic covenant, the Mosaic law, the covenant God made with Israel. It says, even if you turn away from me, you will be judged, but he's not going to put you away entirely. He's always going to keep that remnant. Verse 19, and when your people say, why has the Lord our God done all these things to us? You shall say to them, as you have forsaken me and served foreign gods in your land, so you shall serve foreigners in a land that is not yours. So, I see a lot of stuff here. There's that idea of, you've been serving these foreign gods, so if you like the foreign god so much, you just go and you can live in the foreigner's land. That'll be your punishment. Kind of a poetic justice there. You hear people sometimes use that in America, like, if you like that country so much, why don't you just go and live there? Well, that's kind of what God's saying here. If you like their God so much, you should just go ahead and see how much you like it over there. You can live under their God. Go to his territory, since you don't want to be my special portion anymore. My special land. As you have forsaken me and served foreign gods in your land, so you shall serve foreigners in a land that is not yours. So clearly this is, on a more direct level, just talking about you're going to be put in a place of servitude in a foreign land and enslaved. But I do think, as I mentioned at the beginning, that this speaks to the fact that you have got to serve something in your life. People cannot exist without something to serve, something to honor, something to worship. And here people had turned away from God, but they hadn't turned away from serving something or worshiping something. They just put something else in its place. And, that's really important. I noticed this many years ago. My job occasionally has me have to be around music concerts. I say have to be around because most popular music that people go to is really, really trashy. In fact, was listening to I was having to involve myself with playing some music today for an event, like a playlist, and it was doing stuff that was really horrible music, and it's pop music, I guess, that they just play in stores. I don't know what places play it, but it's like one of those things that if you're not thinking about it, just kind of washes over you, but if you actually stop and listen to it, it's like, wow, that's, that's very bad. And it was a family event we were putting on too, and here we have songs pretty clearly about oral sex. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe let's skip that. Anyway, wow, got off on a big tangent, but that was kind of blowing my brain earlier today, the kind of trash that's out there. Might need to go into that playlist and see if I can edit it a little bit. And when your people say, why has the Lord our God done all these things to us? You shall say to them, as you have forsaken me and served foreign gods in your land, so you shall serve foreigners in land that is not yours. That's right, I remember my train of thought. So sometimes I've been around concerts and stuff, and it's really interesting just seeing people worship when people play music, and they get it's like they get caught up in the spirit of it, and they have this coming together moment, and you can tell they're just all in a sort of awe, and it's just something is there. There's something in mankind that must worship something, that must serve something. You have to have something in that place of God. And if it's not God, you'll just invent something and shove it there. Then it's not to say necessarily all concerts are wrong, but man, there's something there. So it seems to me God's saying, you've chosen what you're going to serve. It's not me, so I'm giving you what you say you want here. So anyway, good food for thought. That's basically what I have for this section. I always talk so long, even when I'm trying to be short. But yeah, some big picture stuff again is just kind of, we see the wrath of God unleashed here, and healthy fear of God is a good thing. These are not happy, feely, wonderful things happening here. This is God being angry. God's not always nice. He's always good. He's always just. He's not always nice. And we should also keep that in mind, that might be part of our character as well. That, at times we don't need to be nice either, but we have to still be good and just. But yeah, the judgment of God, fear of God, just that idea of God's kind of saying, hey, you just chose to worship something, chose to serve something, have at it. Something to consider as well. So anyway, that's it for this time. I guess I'm going to wrap up here, and hope you guys have fun, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.